If you were as obsessed with the Nightmare Before Christmas overlay at the Haunted Mansion in Disneyland as I am, then you already know what this prop is. I have been dying to remake it since I decided to do Nightmare Before Christmas in my yard this year. It turned out so cute. This is maybe one of my favorite props ever. From the holly wreath that has Christmas and Halloween details in it, to the letters that I painstakingly stenciled and beaded with the Cricut, to the body of the countdown clock, which is made entirely of foam. It's very lightweight. Even this little sign is made of foam. The little googly eye rivets, which you can no longer tell used to be googly eyes, but they definitely are. I cannot wait to get this mounted on the side of the house. So if you think this is cool and you want to know how I made it, stick around. I happen to have an old wreath laying around that I didn't want anymore, so I decided to pull all of the yellow floral off of it and give it a little bit of a haircut to use as the foundation for the wreath of the clock. And you need to get the wreath done first so that you can measure how big your backer piece of foam needs to be. So here I am just tracing the circle out. I've got my basic shape for the clock face measured out and cut to fit my wreath. Now I'm going to take some 2-inch thick XPS foam and I'm going to cut it down, and that's going to be the shape. There's 2 parts to the clock. I want the bottom part to sort of be the same width as my wreath, and then the top part is narrower than that. So I think I'm going to cut this piece of scrap foam right here, and we're just going to play around with the shape and size from there. A hot wire tool is my preferred way to cut foam like this. Just make sure your workshop is very well ventilated, or you're wearing a respirator or some other PPE if you're going to be cutting foam like this. The fumes can be very toxic. Once the bigger piece was cut, I eyeballed where I needed to make the cuts for the smaller piece. In order to get that really cool 3D effect like they have on the original clock, I had to also cut a piece of 1/2-inch thick foam as a face. Then I used a hot knife to carve the squares and rectangles out of the face, and you can see I just measured those with a straight edge. I got the facer lined up with the 2 thicker backer pieces, and then I just took my hot wire knife and evened out the edges so they all lined up. This is really important to do if you want to minimize the amount of time you have to spend sanding. Next, I got out my trusty liquid nails, Fuse It. It's my favorite glue for foam projects like this, and I just added a bead all around the back of that facer piece, and then I attached it to the 2-inch thick foam in the back. Then I clamped the whole thing and left it to dry overnight. And the next day I came out to check it and it had set perfectly. So then it was time to get started with sanding. I used a sander with 100 grit sandpaper for the first round, and then I went over top of the whole thing with 220 grit sandpaper. Then just make sure you get all of the dust and foam bits off of the prop before you pull out your spackle and start spackling. So basically what I am doing is just using my finger to work the spackle into all of the joints where the 2 pieces of foam connect, and any other imperfections that I find along the sides and on the inside. And while the spackle is drying, you can go ahead and pull out your googly eyes and your hot glue and start attaching the googly eyes to the foam. This is what is going to be the rivets. I love googly eyes because they are literally the perfect shape and you can get them in a number of sizes. And they're dirt cheap. To make sure you get these evenly on the prop, start in the corners and then work your way into the middle. So you basically want a rivet in each corner and in the middle of each intersection, and then just fill in the gaps from there. You want to let that joint compound dry for several hours, so I took a break from the body of the clock and started working on the wreath. I didn't get it on video, but before I started attaching these holly garlands with zip ties, I went outside and spray painted the whole wreath black. Surprisingly, I only needed one garland to do this whole wreath. I love that all of the wreaths and garlands in the Haunted Mansion overlay at Disney have holly as their foundation because it is so inexpensive as far as Christmas garland goes. A 7.5 foot garland is only $7. Now I went to Hobby Lobby to see what kind of floral they had on sale that was in these colors of dark, like a deep midnight purple, oranges, and reds. So I wound up with these bunches of grapes. They were on clearance for like 60% off, and I'm just cutting chunks of it off and then hot gluing them directly to the garland. Then I clipped twigs off of this berry stem and started putting those in the wreath. Next, I added in some pops of orange with this cute little microberry spray. Added in these little black spiders. One, they were on super clearance, and two, I just thought the pops of black were really cute. Added in a couple of oranges. These I actually already had laying around the house from another project that I never used. I had to show off the finished product because I thought it turned out so stinking cute. All right, so the next day I got back to the body of the clock, so I gave the whole thing a coat of gray. I used my paint sprayer just so I could get good even coverage. It was dark and kind of raining when I did it, so I couldn't get a good video. But here I am after that dried, taking some watered down, really dark, like a charcoal gray color, and just dry brushing it over the front to give it a weathered like metal effect. The trick to this is to make sure that your line patterns all go in the same direction. So you can see that all of my lines go left to right. And you want to make sure you get the front, the top, the sides, the whole thing, because you want it to look like all one cohesive unit. Then I gave the clock face a couple coats of white. And for something like this, where you want to get a really good, thick, even coat, use an interior house paint that has a built-in primer. That is going to give you the best coverage. I added the same white to the insides of the clock body, and I used this trim brush just to make sure that I got really good, clean lines. While that was drying, I got out the Cricut and cut some stencils. I am not a very good artist, so hand drawing these or hand painting the letters and the spider web is just a no-go. So I decided to go with a stencil, and I definitely think it gave the whole thing like a much cleaner, more professional vibe. Next, I covered all of the stencils in white paint with a good coat of shellac, and this is an outdoor shellac that's UV resistant and weather resistant. Next, I wanted to get a dripping rust effect on those googly eye rivets, so I added brown paint to all of the rivets, and then I sprayed them with a light misting of water. So you can see that helped create a dripping effect, and while the prop was still wet, I just added in a little bit more paint below each of the rivets so that it would, just look a little bit more drippy. Once that was dry, I added some liquid nails to the bottom part of the foam that is underneath the clock face, and then I glued the clock face and the body of the clock together. Clamp it down so it can dry overnight. Next, I needed to make the little wooden plaque that says Xmas, so I took a piece of 1/2-inch scrap foam and I carved it and then engraved it to look like just a chunk of old wood. Gave it a coat of brown paint and a black wash, and then I started painting the Xmas letters on the front. In hindsight, I probably should have just grabbed some red vinyl and cut these with the Cricut, because it took like 10 separate coats of this red acrylic paint to stand out where you could see it. So take my advice and use your Cricut to stencil this if you have one. Otherwise, you can paint it. Once it's painted, you're just going to want to run some rope through the pilot holes that you drilled and forgot to tell everyone about, but they're definitely there. And then just tie off the ends of those ropes. I cannot get over how good this prop turned out. Some of the details were pretty meticulous, which is not something I'm used to. Normally my Halloween props are, supposed to be a little messed up anyway, so it's okay if they're not perfect. This one, I really wanted to get it right, and I love it. I love how it turned out. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, hit that like button, and leave a comment. And if you decide to use this tutorial to make this version of the prop yourself, please tag me. I would love to see whatever it is that you create.